Kennedy's lawyer has asked the FDA to revoke approval of the polio vaccine. That's cool. Siri, who specializes in vaccine lawsuits, has been at Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s side reviewing candidates for top jobs at the Department of Health and Human Services. Petitioned the government to remove its approval of the polio vaccine. Wouldn't the Trump administration be able to do this, like, very singularly? This was back in 2022. Well, the article's from right now, but back in 2022, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wasn't the head of the Department of Health and Human Services to be the elect, the nominated head of the DHHS. So, putting all my money in iron lung stocks? True. I thought he was just against mRNA vaccines. What happened to that? I assume you know this, but he was lying. Much of Mr. Siri's work, including the polio petition filed in 2022, has been on behalf of the Informed Consent Action Network, a nonprofit whose founder is a close ally of Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Siri also represented Mr. Kennedy during his presidential campaign. Nice. Mr. Kennedy says he does not want to take away access to any vaccines, but as he prepares for his confirmation hearing and plans a fresh health agenda, his continuing close partnership with Mr. Siri suggests that vaccine policy will be under sharp scrutiny. I love the coded, like, journalist language where you can never say anything, you know? Suggests vaccine policy will be under sharp scrutiny. Like, these motherfuckers really would write, like, you know, Adolf Hitler's rhetoric on German Jews poses challenges for their continued residency and safety within, you know, the Weimar Republic. Like, it's, they will, like, it literally doesn't matter how egregious the circumstances are. They will always whitewash it. At the Trump transition headquarters in Florida, Mr. Siri has joined Mr. Kennedy in questioning and choosing candidates for top health positions, according to someone who observed the interactions but insisted on anonymity to disclose private conversations. They have asked candidates about their views of vaccines, the person said. Okay. Just of vaccines in general, like, literally, like, are you pro or anti? I love these conversations we're having, like, going into the next Department of Health and Human Services, you know, just like an open question, like, hey, you know, do you believe in germ theory? Just, like, you know, no worries. I'm just wondering, like, do you believe in germ theory? No biggie or anything. Mr. Kennedy has privately expressed interest in having Mr. Siri serve in the Health and Human Services Department's top legal job, general counsel. However, Mr. Siri suggested he might have more influence outside the administration. That's great. At his law firm, Siri and Glimstead, he oversees about 40 professionals working on vaccine cases and policy. Somebody on the outside needs to be petitioning them. I love Siri, Mr. Kennedy said in a clip played on a recent episode of a podcast hosted by Del Bigtree, who is Mr. Kennedy's former campaign communications director and the founder of the Informed Consent Action Network, which describes itself as a medical freedom nonprofit. There's no one who's been a greater asset to the medical freedom movement than him. Dude, they might actually get rid of the mandate for polio vaccine. They might actually make it opt-in. They're not going to ban it or anything crazy like that, but they might actually remove, like, it's not even a joke. They might actually plague the United States by making these all opt-in. All you would need is, like, a couple percentage points of parents not opting their children into polio vaccine. You're all going to be fine. You've already had your polio vaccine. It's a very effective vaccine. We're going to see, like, a giant uptick in the incidence rate of polio. It's crazy. No polio has been historically eradicated from North America. Most babies don't get vaccinated for it to begin with. Wait, is that true? Hold on. I thought that polio was one of the mandatory vaccinations. Polio vaccination has been part of the routine childhood immunization schedule in the U.S. for decades. Yeah, it's still part of the current... It's still part of the... Incorrect? What? But no, I'm looking at the CDC right now. What do you mean incorrect? I have a 6-year-old. He had to get one to go to school. Yeah, from cdc.gov. Polio vaccination has been part of the routine childhood immunization schedule in the U.S. for decades. It's still part of the routine childhood immunization schedule. Inactivated polio vaccine is the only polio vaccine that's been given in the U.S. since. Is routine mandated? You are not forced to provide these vaccines, but if you want your children to go into school, you need to provide evidence of them. In practice, polio vaccines are effectively mandatory because you have to, like, completely remove yourself from You know, like they don't force you to take it, but you have to get into school. But they might remove it from the routine schedule for vaccination or remove the school requirement. NIH article entitled Polio Returns to the US. Hell yeah, brother. Good thing I got my vaccination, huh? Whew. You know, we're all safe. I remember this. On July 21st, the US witnessed the first case of poliomyelitis after 3 decades of its eradication. Sheesh. Imagine getting polio. Wait, those are the same, aren't they? It's one of the like subgroups of polio, I think. There's like a few things that are in the polio. What year did they stop giving the polio vaccine? They still give the polio vaccine. Yeah, 2025 is when they stopped giving it. I think it's safe to say Kennedy is working on behalf of the rich, granted. And he simply wants to start wiping out excess poor people. I actually don't think that's true. I think that Kennedy is a genuine conspiracy theorist. I think he's one of the only true believers in the group. I think that what we're seeing here is basically like this administration's version of Lysenkoism or Nazi mystical esotericism, like usually alongside fascism, because fascism is deliberately irrational. In addition to people who are just weaponizing irrational rhetoric to get public support, you also have people who drink the Kool-Aid and genuinely believe a lot of the crazy shit and more, right? Have you ever seen like transcripts of communication between Hitler and Mussolini? Mussolini is the perfect example of a guy who was a fascist because it was convenient. Mussolini started out as a communist, like, you know, kneecap breaker, you know, like he was like a thug for union groups, wasn't he? And then he switched over to fascism. He doesn't believe in anything, you know. Fascism for him was just a convenient way of getting public support. There was no like real heart of hearts commitment to any element of his ideology. Hitler believed what he said, at least a lot of it. I mean, he lied all the time, but he believed a lot of crazy stuff. So in a lot of the communications between Mussolini and Hitler, Mussolini is like, you know, yeah, man, that's great. Just, you know, moving the trains along or whatever, doing fascism, haha. And Hitler will be talking about how he thinks that his body was invaded by a demon ghost spirit while he was asleep and that he's now being possessed by like a Hyperborean, you know, witch or something. I don't know. He's crazy. There were a lot of like weirdo mysticists back in Nazi Germany, you know, like that's where you get stuff like Indiana Jones from. Speaking of the Game Awards, you know how all the Indiana Jones plots were like the Nazis are going after the ancient staff of Ra because they think it'll imbue the Aryan race with power, like, you know, unrivaled or whatever. They were like that. Like that's real. That's true. That was a real thing. The staff of Ra was real. It incinerated many people. No, that's the so-called firebombing of Berlin was actually just like they let that shit off the hook and was like trying to control a garden hose on full blast. No, really though, they were like freaks about trying to get crazy shit. They loved their conspiracy shit. Yeah. Die Glocke was a purported top-secret Nazi scientific technological device, secret weapon, or Wunderwaffe, first described by Polish journalist and author Igor Witkowski. It was later popularized by military journalist and author Nick Cook, who associated it with Nazi occultism, anti-gravity, and free energy suppression research. Anyway, like my point is, I think that the vaccine stuff is an element of this fascist regime's genuine like occultism, basically. I'm not kidding. Do you all get that? I think that's a pretty defensible position. Like, I actually don't think there's any rational explanation for this at all. I don't think you can math that out. I don't think there's any, like, the billionaires are all collaborating because they really want polio incidence rates go up. I don't think they want, I don't think they were, like, planning for that. I just think this is what happens when rationality isn't a part of your governing principles. Like Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Siri insists he does not want to take vaccines away from anyone who wants them. Right, so this is what we mean about like removing it from the typical vaccine schedule and delisting it as a requirement for getting into school, which would in practice lead to it being taken by far fewer young people. He told Arizona legislators last year after laying out his concerns about the vaccines for polio and other illnesses. Sheesh. He did not mention the petitions he's lodged on behalf of ICANN with the Food and Drug Administration, asking regulators to withdraw or suspend approval of vaccines not only for polio, but for hepatitis B as well. Great. Yeah, again, like, remember, they're always lying when they say you can get them if you want. He's trying to get them banned. Removing approval for vaccines means you can't get the vaccines. Removing approval means you're no longer legally allowed to distribute that. It removes them from the scheduling attack. You can't receive them anymore. So when he says like, no, you can still get them if you want, maybe that'll end up being the actual outcome because it's more achievable. But the real desired goal is to ban them altogether. Mr. Siri is also representing ICANN and petitioning the FDA to, quote, pause distribution of 13 other vaccines, including combination products that cover tetanus, diphtheria, polio, and hepatitis A, until their makers disclose details about aluminum, this mystery substance aluminum, an ingredient researchers have associated with a small increase in asthma cases. Is this Andrew Wakefield shit? I mean, yeah, kind of the same like ballpark, right? Mr. Siri declined to be interviewed. Oh, I bet. Yeah, clean the rust off your nails, folks. How good is the chance they can actually pull this off against Pharma? They could do it. Oh, keep in mind, what I think they're actually going to really try to do is remove it from mandatory scheduling. Make it so it's not part of just the shit you get. Make it so that if you want those vaccines, you have to pay massive amounts for them, and you have to go out of your way to do it. Make it totally optional and make it cost a lot. Like, that's probably because then big pharma profits, right? That's probably what's going to end up happening. Full banning of the vaccines would not likely happen, even if Kennedy wants to. In the past 4 years, Republicans have dramatically shifted their views on vaccines, according to a Gallup poll. Of course, they've been fed nonstop like anti-vaccine propaganda since COVID broke out. People believe what they're told to believe. Always. That's it. It's that simple. I really wish the Democrats had done a better job on this messaging rather than falling back on the smug, like, trust the science stuff, you know? Don't get me wrong. Dr. Fauci legitimately is a public servant who's done a lot of good for the country. I'm not saying that he's, like, evil or whatever, but, like, trust the science loser isn't really a compelling argument to people who believe that QAnon is real. I think that, like, maybe messaging more along the lines of, you want your children to die, you're killing your children, or like railing against RFK Jr. for killing those children in American Samoa by discouraging them from getting the vaccine that would have saved their lives. Why didn't they go after him at all? Crazy. Fauci isn't good at messaging. Good doctor, though? Yeah, no, he's not a politician. It's not his job to be good at messaging, but he was kind of left out in the water there, you know? If liberals didn't have smug elitism to lean on, they would fall over. Yeah. He was done dirty, not his fault. Oh, no, I really, like, he's made mistakes, but I think, like, I don't really care about criticizing Dr. Fauci, you know? He's like a 100-year-old doctor with a very storied history who was put in the difficult position of being, like, the public voice of, like, the largest pandemic in a century. It's just a rough situation to be in. Dr. Fauci! Didn't Fauci f*** up AIDS? I think he made, like, some mistakes back then, but didn't everyone? Nobody hit everything right with that one. I think the main problem with Fauci back then, wasn't he still with the CDC and the CDC were banned from like even acknowledging it? Like he was a medical professional at a time where the government was telling medical professionals to full on like ignore it, you know? That blame lies with Reagan. I'm sure he made mistakes too, but I don't like, you know, being a professional in this kind of field means making mistakes. It's not like we're talking about, you know, tried and tested, like, you know, construction worker, put the cones down, reroute traffic. You should have a playbook for this. Everyone just got hit with COVID. I mean, it was a pandemic. No one knew the rules at first. Same with AIDS, right? I mean, that's kind of how it is. Epidemiology is a very high risk, high reward field in terms of like potential payout for any given action. It's difficult to hit on that well. So, you know, I try to some leeway there, you know. Oh, anyway, yeah, get your polio vaccination if you don't, for some reason, if you don't have one. That would be good. Who knows how expensive it's going to be soon. God.